They say age brings wisdom, but what my son didn't know is that it also brings something far more dangerous, the ability to see through lies. When Harold sold my $4 million home without telling me, smiling as he exiled me to Nevada, he thought he was dealing with a senile old woman who would sign anything placed in front of her, a burden to be discarded, a problem to be solved. What he never suspected was that I had already visited the notary's office 15 days earlier, that every patronizing smile, every whispered phone call, every document hidden under my medication, I saw it all. While he was busy planning my exile, I was quietly transferring everything I owned to someone who actually cared. "Live far away from here, Mother," he told me, and I laughed. He thought it was senility. It wasn't. It was the beginning of justice. Follow our channel for more stories that will break your heart and heal it again. Like and comment to let us know where you're watching from. And stay tuned for the rest of this journey of betrayal, resilience, and the quiet power of a woman who refused to disappear. I was sitting at the edge of the table, hands folded in my lap, waiting for him to say anything beyond that damn smile. Harold, my only son, was looking at me like I was nothing but a burden, a nuisance to be dealt with. The morning light caught the silver in his perfectly combed hair, making him look almost angelic, but I knew better. I'd given birth to him 62 years ago in the very bedroom upstairs, and now he couldn't even look me in the eyes. "Mother," he said, sliding a glossy brochure across the mahogany table, the same table where I'd served him birthday cakes for decades. "I've found a dignified solution for you. A small house in Nevada, away from the hustle and bustle. The dry climate will be good for your arthritis, and they have excellent doctors for someone of your condition. My condition, as if aging was a disease that needed quarantine. The taxi is already waiting outside," he continued, checking his Rolex, the one his father had given him before cancer took him from us. "I've packed your essentials. The rest will be donated. You don't need all this stuff anymore." I looked around at my home of 47 years, the home where I'd given birth, where I'd buried my husband Robert, where I'd planted every rose bush in the garden with my own hands. The kitchen still had the mark on the wall where I'd measured Harold's height every year. The living room had witnessed Christmas mornings, Thanksgiving dinners, and quiet evenings of knitting while watching the sunset. And just like that, it wasn't mine anymore. He had sold it, without telling me, without asking me. "You sold my house," I whispered, my voice cracking just enough to make him uncomfortable. "Our house, Mother. Dad left it to both of us, remember? And it's just too big for you now. You're always complaining about the stairs, the garden work." What he meant was, it was worth $4 million in this neighborhood, and he couldn't wait to cash in. "When?" I asked simply. "The papers were finalized yesterday. The new owners move in next week." He smiled like he'd done me a favor. "I got an excellent price. You'll be very comfortable with the money I've set aside for you." Set aside, as if my life's worth could be condensed into whatever amount he deemed appropriate. Little did Harold know, and he would never have imagined, that 15 days before this conversation, I had already visited the notary's office. I had already packed my bags, not the physical ones, but the emotional ones. I already knew about his plan. I knew about the forged documents, about the lawyer he was using, about his hurry to get rid of me. He thought I signed everything without reading, but I did read. I did listen. I did wait, and I did act. I noticed the way his new wife, Veronica, would measure my bedroom with her eyes whenever she visited. "This would make such a lovely office space," she'd say, not even trying to hide her intentions. I saw how Harold would whisper on the phone, quickly hanging up whenever I entered the room. I heard him telling his friends at Robert's funeral that managing Mother would be his next big project. "You don't survive 76 years on this earth without learning to read between the lines. The driver can only wait 10 more minutes, Harold said, glancing at his watch again. "I've arranged for someone to help you settle in Nevada. Her name is Meredith, and she'll check on you twice a week." "How thoughtful," I said, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. He seemed pleased with himself, relieved that I wasn't making a scene. What he mistook for compliance was actually calm calculation. "Live well far away from here, Mother," he said with that patronizing smile, patting my hand like I was a child. "It's for the best." And I laughed, a genuine laugh that bubbled up from deep within me. He frowned, concerned that his elderly mother was having some sort of breakdown, or perhaps showing signs of the dementia he so conveniently diagnosed me with whenever I disagreed with him. "Is something funny?" he asked, irritation seeping into his perfectly controlled voice. "No, dear, nothing at all," I replied, picking up the small suitcase he'd packed for me. 76 years of life reduced to a carry-on. As I walked to the door, I touched the wallpaper one last time. Robert and I had chosen it together, tiny blue flowers that had faded over decades of sunlight. Harold thought he was watching his senile mother saying goodbye to a house. He had no idea he was watching a woman who had already transferred everything to another name 15 days earlier. When he said, "Live far away from here, Mother," I laughed, and he thought it was senility. It wasn't. It was the beginning of justice. People think we go blind with age, but the eyes of a woman who has already lost a husband, 2 brothers, and her faith don't close anymore. Those eyes see everything, even what others try to hide. It was a Tuesday morning in early October when I first discovered Harold's plan. The maple trees outside my bedroom window were turning that beautiful crimson color that Robert used to compare to my hair when we first met. "Autumn fire," he called it. Now my hair is silver and Robert is gone, but those trees still faithfully change every year, oblivious to human dramas. I was dusting the bookshelf in Harold's old study, the one room he insisted I maintain for his weekend visits, when I heard his car pull into the driveway. He wasn't expected until Friday, so I peered through the lace curtains, curious. Harold stepped out in his tailored navy suit, followed by a thin man carrying a leather briefcase. They spoke in hushed tones, glancing up at the house as if evaluating merchandise. My instincts, honed by decades of raising a child who thought he was cleverer than he actually was, told me to keep quiet. So I shuffled back to my bedroom, grabbed my knitting, the half-finished scarf I'd been working on for months, and settled into my rocking chair, the picture of a harmless elderly woman passing time. They entered without knocking, Harold's key in the lock, his voice artificially loud. "Mother, I brought Mr. Peterson to discuss some boring paperwork." "Don't trouble yourself." I smiled and nodded, needles clicking rhythmically. "I'll make some tea," I offered, rising slowly using the wooden cane Robert had carved for me before the cancer took his strength. "No need, Mother. We'll just be in my study for a few minutes." I waited until their footsteps retreated down the hallway before setting down my knitting, moving with a silence that would have surprised my son, who believed age had made me clumsy and loud. I crept to the study door, which they'd left slightly ajar. "She'll sign anything you put in front of her," Harold was saying, his voice low but clear. "She hasn't read a document thoroughly since Dad died. Just make sure the stamps look official." I saw the papers with fake stamps. I saw the forged signature, my signature, practiced and replicated on several documents. I saw how Harold spoke urgently with the lawyer in the hallway, but I pretended not to see, because I already had a plan forming in my mind, like a photograph slowly developing in chemical solution. That very evening, after Harold and his lawyer friend had left, I called the only person who had never asked anything in return, Dolores, my former caregiver, a Salvadoran woman who lived in a modest trailer in Arizona just outside Phoenix. She had cared for me after I broke my femur 3 years ago, bathing me when I couldn't stand, reading to me when cataracts nearly took away my light, and above all, she listened, truly listened when I spoke. It took me 2 days to arrange transportation without Harold knowing. My neighbor Martha, a widow like me but 15 years younger, drove me to the bus station at dawn. "Are you sure about this, Evelyn?" she asked, concern etching her kind face. I just squeezed her hand and nodded. The journey to Arizona was long and uncomfortable. My arthritis flared up during the 6-hour bus ride, but the pain was nothing compared to the determination burning in my chest. When I finally arrived at Dolores's trailer park, the desert sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded me of the watercolors Robert and I used to paint with on summer vacations. Dolores's eyes widened when she opened her door. "Senora Evelyn, what are you doing here alone?" She ushered me inside, her small home neat but cramped, smelling of cinnamon and coffee. I sat at her tiny kitchen table, my hands trembling slightly, not from age, but from the weight of what I was about to ask. "Dolores," I began, my voice steadier than I felt, "would you mind if your name appeared on the deed to my house?" She stared at me, confused, her dark eyes searching mine. "Your house? But why? I don't understand." Tears welled in her eyes as I explained Harold's betrayal, the forged documents, the plan to ship me off to Nevada so he could cash in on the property that held my entire life's memories. "He thinks I'm just a statue in his museum," I told her, anger making my voice shake. "Something to be moved around or put away when inconvenient." Dolores listened, really listened like she always did. When I finished, she took my weathered hands in hers and said simply, "Tell me what to do." She cried, said she didn't understand why I would trust her with something so valuable, but she accepted. Not for the money or the property. Dolores never cared about such things, but because she understood what it meant to be invisible, to be discarded by those who should care the most. That night, as I slept on Dolores's pull-out couch, I dreamt of Robert. He was smiling, nodding in that way he did when he was proud of me. In my dream, he whispered, "Show them who you really are, Evie." And for the first time since his funeral, I woke up with a sense of purpose rather than loss. For 3 weeks, I hid the true documents inside my mother's old recipe book. That book was a family treasure. Its edges burned from a kitchen fire back in 1952, with an iron box built into its spine where ration sugar coupons were once stored during the war. Nobody would ever think to open it. The leather binding was cracked and peeling, the pages yellowed with age and stained with decades of cooking experiments. My mother had brought it from England when she immigrated to America as a war bride, and it contained not just recipes but memories. Notes in the margins about which dishes my father loved, which ones I refused to eat as a child, which ones she served at Christmas dinners and family celebrations. Harold only came to the house to pick up things he wanted and would leave talking in that condescending voice. "Would you like me to read this for you, Mother? It's too much information for your head." He developed this habit of speaking to me as if I were a child, enunciating his words with exaggerated clarity, raising his voice slightly, though my hearing was perfectly fine. It started after Robert died, this subtle shift in how he addressed me, as if widowhood had somehow diminished my intelligence, along with my marital status. On his most recent visit, he'd brought Veronica, his third wife, 30 years his junior, with calculating eyes and a smile that never reached them. While Harold was occupied in the attic, supposedly looking for his father's gold cufflinks, she wandered into the kitchen where I was pretending to struggle with opening a jar. "This house is just too big for someone like you," she said, her manicured nails tapping against my marble countertop, the one Robert had installed as a 20th anniversary present. "Harold worries about you falling on these stairs. We both do." I nodded, playing the role they expected, the frail, grateful mother. "You're both so thoughtful," I murmured, secretly sliding my mother's recipe book further under a kitchen towel. What they didn't know was that besides the deed, I had stored something even more powerful, a recording. I had hidden my cell phone under the tablecloth and captured Harold telling a real estate agent, "She won't even notice. Just put the deed to sign along with her medications." It happened on a Thursday afternoon, 2 weeks after my visit to Dolores. Harold had brought a man he introduced as an old friend from college to the house. I recognized the calculating look in the man's eyes immediately, the same look I'd seen in the eyes of predators throughout my life, men who viewed elderly women as easy targets. I excused myself to make tea, but instead of heading to the kitchen, I slipped my cell phone, a gift from Robert before he died, insisting I learn to use modern technology, under the heavy-lace tablecloth in the dining room. I pressed record, then shuffled loudly back to the kitchen, making sure they heard the tap of my cane against the hardwood floors. When I returned with the tea tray, deliberately taking my time, Harold and his friend had moved to the dining room, spreading papers across the table. "Mom, this is just some routine paperwork," Harold said, that artificial brightness in his voice that always signaled deception. "Nothing for you to worry about." I nodded, setting down the tea with slightly shaking hands, a tremor that was real, though not from age, but from the fury building inside me. "Should I sign something, dear?" I asked, the picture of maternal compliance. They exchanged glances, and the friend cleared his throat. "Not today, Mrs. Williams. We're just evaluating some options for your future care." I left them alone then, making a show of needing my afternoon nap. From my bedroom, I could hear their voices growing more animated, more careless. When I retrieved my phone later that evening, after Harold and his accomplice had left, I played back the recording with trembling fingers. Harold's voice came through with perfect clarity. "She won't even notice. Just put the deed to sign along with her medications. She takes so many pills these days. She doesn't even check what she's signing anymore." The real estate agent, not a college friend after all, sounded hesitant. "And if she asks questions?" "She won't," Harold assured him with a laugh that cut through me like ice. "Tell her it's for her retirement account. She trusts me completely." Hearing those words corroded something inside me. It was like having acid poured directly onto my heart. The son I had raised, had loved unconditionally, had sacrificed for, spoke about me with such casual contempt, but it reinforced what I already knew. I needed to exit the stage, on top, and calmly. That night I carefully transferred the recording to a small USB drive that Robert had once shown me how to use. I placed it alongside the true property documents in the hollow spine of my mother's recipe book, then slid the book back onto the kitchen shelf between modern American cooking and holiday baking, a place Harold would never look. Every night before sleeping, I would check to make sure everything was still there, running my fingers along the edges of the documents, touching the small USB drive, reassuring myself that my plan was real, that I wasn't just an old woman with delusions of justice. In those quiet moments, alone in the house that had witnessed my entire adult life, I would sometimes falter. Was I doing the right thing? Was this betrayal of Harold? For it was a betrayal, even if justified, something I could live with. But then I would remember his voice on that recording, dismissive, calculating, cold. And I knew that what I was planning wasn't vengeance. It was self-preservation. It was dignity. In the car on the way to the airport, I thought about crying. The leather seat felt cold beneath me, despite the warm May morning. The driver, a young man with kind eyes and a worn baseball cap, kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror. I must have looked like what I was supposed to be, a discarded mother being shipped off to a retirement home in Nevada, a burden being relocated. "You all right back there, ma'am?" he asked, his voice gentle with a particular kind of pity reserved for the elderly. I smoothed my navy blue skirt, the one I'd worn to Robert's funeral 7 years ago, and offered him a smile that surprised even me with its genuine warmth. "I'm fine, dear. Just visiting relatives." The lie came easily. What would be the point in telling this stranger the truth? That I was a 76-year-old woman with a single carry-on suitcase and an envelope containing a secret, the power of attorney that donated my entire fortune to a support fund for abandoned elderly women, coordinated by Dolores herself, now the head of a small group of women like us. "That's nice," he replied, clearly relieved I wasn't about to have some sort of elderly crisis in his back seat. "Family's important." "Yes," I agreed, watching the familiar streets of Westbridge pass by for what might be the last time. "Family is important. That's why you have to choose them carefully." He chuckled, not understanding my meaning, and turned up the radio. Some pop song I didn't recognize filled the silence between us, and I was grateful for it. It gave me space to think, to remember, to plan. The house Harold had sold could no longer be sold. That sale would fall through the legal cracks, and I wouldn't lift a finger to help. I would let him learn the hard way the value of disregard. Let him face the consequences of his actions without a mother to bail him out, as I had done so many times throughout his life. I remembered the time when Harold was 17 and crashed Robert's car, the vintage Mustang my husband had restored with his own hands. Harold had been drinking, though he swore he hadn't. I stood between him and his father's wrath, believing, as mothers do, that protecting him was my job. Now I wondered if I had done him a disservice by shielding him from consequences for so long. The taxi turned onto the highway, accelerating toward Hartford International Airport. The familiar landmarks of my life began to disappear. The park where I'd pushed Harold on the swings, the church where Robert and I had exchanged vows in 1968, the hospital where I'd said goodbye to him for the last time, all receding in the rear-view mirror, becoming smaller, less distinct, until they vanished completely. I should have felt grief, loss, anger. Instead, my laughter came more easily than tears. It bubbled up from some deep well inside me. Not the bitter laughter of defeat, but the liberating laughter of someone who has finally shed a heavy burden. The driver glanced at me again, confusion creasing his brow, but I didn't offer any explanation. What would I have said? That after decades of being the dutiful wife, the supportive mother, the invisible elderly woman, I had finally taken control. That I had outmaneuvered the son who thought I was too senile to notice his betrayal. That I had found, in my 76th year, a kind of freedom I hadn't known since before my marriage. No, some victories are best savored in silence. At the airport, I insisted on carrying my own bag, a small act of independence that seemed to confuse the driver, who had clearly expected to help the frail old lady. I paid him with cash from my purse, including a generous tip that made his eyes widen. "God bless you, ma'am," he said, touching the brim of his cap. "And you," I replied, meaning it. In my experience, it was rarely the powerful who showed kindness. It was people like this young man, people who knew what it meant to struggle, to be overlooked. The airport terminal was crowded with the usual mix of hurried business people, exhausted parents with cranky children, college students with oversized backpacks. No one paid any attention to an elderly woman moving carefully through the check-in process. Invisibility had its advantages sometimes. I checked my single bag, kept the envelope with the power of attorney in my handbag, and made my way through security with the deliberate pace of someone who has nowhere particular to be. The TSA agent barely glanced at me as he waved me through. Another invisible old woman posing no threat, warranting no attention. As I settled into a seat at my gate, I pulled out my phone and saw a text message from Harold. "Let me know when you arrive safely," as if he cared. As if my safety had been his priority when he arranged to ship me off to Nevada without consultation or consent. I didn't reply. Let him wonder. Let him feel, for once, what it's like to be ignored. Instead, I opened a message from Dolores. "Everything is proceeding as planned. The papers have been filed. Mr. Griffin says we'll hear something within the week." Mr. Griffin was the lawyer Dolores had found, a sharp-minded man in his 60s who specialized in elder law, and who had taken one look at Harold's scheme and called it a textbook case of elder financial abuse. He had agreed to take our case pro bono, his eyes flashing with the righteous anger of someone who had seen too many elderly people exploited by their own families. At the boarding gate, I looked back for the last time and thanked myself for never having lost the ability to observe in silence, for noticing the way Harold's voice changed when he lied, for seeing the way Veronica measured my rooms with her eyes, for hearing the whispered phone calls, the half-truths, the patronizing reassurances. As the boarding announcement came over the loudspeaker, I gathered my things and joined the line. An elderly couple ahead of me leaned on each other, their bodies curved toward one another like parentheses around a shared life. I felt a momentary pang, not of jealousy, but of gratitude. Robert and I had had that. For 39 years, we had had that kind of love, that kind of partnership. Harold had never seen it, or if he had, he hadn't valued it. The flight attendant checked my boarding pass with a professional smile. "Enjoy your flight, Mrs. Williams." "I will," I said, stepping onto the jetway. "I'm starting a new chapter today." She nodded politely, already looking past me to the next passenger. She couldn't have known how literally I meant those words. In Nevada, I didn't go to a clinic. The taxi driver looked puzzled when I gave him the address, a converted ranch house on the outskirts of Carson City, its exterior weathered by desert sun and wind, but clean and well-maintained. A hand-painted sign hung by the entrance. Invisible Grandmother's Project. Not exactly the sterile retirement facility Harold believed he was shipping me off to. The driver helped me with my single suitcase, concern etched on his face. "You sure this is right, ma'am? Doesn't look like no retirement home." "It's exactly right," I assured him, pressing an extra tip into his palm. "This is where I need to be." As the taxi pulled away, kicking up dust on the unpaved driveway, the front door of the ranch house swung open. Dolores stood there, her round face split with a wide smile, arms outstretched. Behind her, I could see other women, gray-haired, wrinkled, with the same look in their eyes that I recognized from my own mirror, a mixture of pain and determination. "Evelyn!" Dolores exclaimed, embracing me with the kind of unrestrained affection that had become foreign to me in recent years. "You made it! Come inside, come meet everyone." The interior of the ranch house was nothing like the cold, institutional space Harold had described to me. Instead, it was warm, filled with mismatched furniture that somehow worked together. Walls covered with photographs and artwork, the air scented with something baking in the kitchen. It reminded me of the home I'd created with Robert. Not fancy or perfect, but alive with the evidence of people who cared. "Ladies," Dolores announced, guiding me into a large living room where 5 women sat in a circle of chairs. "This is Evelyn, the one I told you about." 5 pairs of eyes turned to me, not with the pity or dismissal I had grown accustomed to, but with recognition. These women saw me, really saw me. "Welcome to the Sisterhood of the Discarded," said a tall, elegant black woman with close-cropped silver hair. She extended her hand. "I'm Maria. My grandson had me committed to a psychiatric facility when I refused to sign over my brownstone in Harlem, claimed I was having delusions. One by one, they introduced themselves. Eleanor, a former high school English teacher whose nephew had manipulated her into signing over her house after her husband died. Sophia, whose son-in-law had emptied her bank accounts while she was recovering from hip surgery. Pearl, whose children had sold her farm out from under her while she was visiting her sister in Oregon. And Diane, whose family had simply stopped calling, stopped visiting, until she found herself utterly alone in the world. There, in that room full of women like me, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. Hope. And together, we were rebuilding what had been taken from us. Dignity. "We call ourselves the Invisible Grandmothers," Dolores explained as she poured coffee into mismatched mugs. "Because that's what society makes us, invisible, until we need to sign something, of course." The bitterness in her voice was tempered with resilience. "But we see each other," Maria added. "And now we fight back." They showed me around the house, the shared bedrooms where women stayed temporarily until they got back on their feet, the vegetable garden out back, the small office where Dolores and Maria handled the legal work of helping women like us reclaim what had been stolen from them. "We're not a charity," Dolores explained. "We're a movement." That first evening we sat around a large wooden table for dinner. Homemade enchiladas that Sophia had prepared, cornbread from Diane's family recipe, a salad with vegetables from the garden. The conversation flowed naturally, punctuated with bursts of laughter that surprised me with their genuine warmth. These women who had experienced profound betrayal by those they loved most had somehow found their way back to joy. After dinner, Maria showed me to a small but comfortable bedroom I would share with Eleanor. "It's not much," she apologized, "but it's safe." Safety. Such a simple thing, yet so profound when you've discovered that your own home, your own family, is no longer safe for you. That night, as I unpacked my meager belongings, I found my phone at the bottom of my bag. The screen lit up with notifications, 3 messages from Harold. "Hope you arrived safely. The house sold successfully. Love you." Each message was like a knife twist. The casual "love you" at the end, a phrase he rarely uttered in person, felt particularly cruel in its emptiness. I read the messages but didn't respond. I let time take its course. But I knew that soon his lies would return to him like letters returned by the post office. Eleanor entered the room, her nightgown flowing around her thin frame. At 82, she was the oldest of the group, with arthritis that bent her fingers at odd angles and cloudy eyes that still missed nothing. "Not answering?" she asked, nodding at my phone. "No," I replied, setting it on the nightstand. "Not yet." She smiled, a smile that held decades of wisdom. "Good. Let him stew. That's what I did with my nephew. By the time I was ready to respond, he was already drowning in the consequences of his actions." "Did it work?" I asked. Eleanor's smile widened. "Oh, yes. He came crawling back begging forgiveness. I gave it to him too." "Really?" "Of course. Forgiveness is free. Trust, however," she tapped her temple, "that costs everything." As I settled into bed that night, in a strange room in a strange city, I felt an unexpected sense of peace. The emptiness that had hollowed me out when Harold betrayed me began to fill with something new. Not happiness exactly, but purpose. I was no longer just a victim of my son's greed. I was a woman with agency, with allies, with a plan. In the darkness, I whispered to Robert, as I often did when I needed strength, "I wish you could see this, love. I wish you could see me now." And though it might have been my imagination, I felt a warmth beside me, as if he were there, approving of this new path I'd found. 2 weeks passed in the sanctuary of the Invisible Grandmother's Project. I fell into a gentle rhythm with the other women. Morning coffee on the back porch, watching the desert sunrise paint the mountains in shades of pink and gold. Afternoons helping in the vegetable garden or assisting Dolores with paperwork. Evenings of shared meals and stories around the long oak table. It was during one of these peaceful mornings that my phone rang. I rarely carried it anymore. What was the point? Harold's messages had dwindled to perfunctory check-ins every few days, each one increasingly terse. But that morning, I tucked the phone into the pocket of my cardigan out of habit, and now it vibrated against my hip like an angry wasp. The screen displayed Dolores's name, which was puzzling since she was supposedly in town running errands. I answered with a sense of foreboding. "Evelyn!" Her voice burst through the speaker, so loud that I had to hold the phone away from my ear. The sound that followed was unexpected. Dolores was laughing. Not just chuckling, but full-bodied, unrestrained laughter that seemed to bubble up from some deep well of joy. "He called here," she gasped between fits of laughter. "He found the document at the registry. He said he's going to sue me." For a moment I couldn't process what she was saying. Harold called you." "Yes." More laughter, nearly hysterical now. He was shouting so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. Said I took advantage of you, that I manipulated a vulnerable old woman, that he'd have me deported. The mental image. My perfectly controlled, always composed son losing his temper on the phone with Dolores sent a wave of inappropriate laughter through me as well. I pictured his face turning that particular shade of red it did when things didn't go his way, the same color it had been when he was 4, and I wouldn't let him have a second ice cream cone. "What did you say to him?" I managed to ask, fighting to control my own laughter. "I said he should speak to our lawyer." Dolores's voice steadied slightly. "He didn't like that. Called me some very ugly names, but Evelyn..." Her tone shifted, becoming more serious. "You need to turn on your TV. Channel 7 News." My hand trembled as I reached for the remote control on the porch table. Maria, who had been reading quietly beside me, looked up with concern. The television flickered to life, and I punched in the channel number with unsteady fingers. The screen filled with Harold's face. Not the composed, successful businessman he projected to the world, but a harried, desperate version I barely recognized. His normally perfect hair was disheveled, his eyes bloodshot, his tie askew. The ticker at the bottom of the screen read, "Local businessman Harold Williams under investigation for elder fraud." "Oh my God," I whispered, the phone slipping from my fingers. Maria caught it, putting it to her ear. "Dolores, it's Maria. We're watching it now. Call the lawyer and tell him to send those documents immediately." She hung up and placed a steadying hand on my shoulder. "Breathe, Evelyn. Just breathe. The reporter's voice cut through my shock. Williams is accused of attempting to sell property belonging to his elderly mother without her consent, using falsified documents and signatures. The alleged fraud came to light when the real property owner, a Miss Dolores Ramirez, filed complaints with both the county recorder's office and the district attorney. The camera cut to a young female reporter standing outside my home, my beautiful colonial house with its white columns and wraparound porch, the garden where Robert and I had spent countless summer evenings, where Harold had learned to ride a bicycle, where I had planted roses for each decade of my marriage. The property, valued at approximately $4 million, was legally transferred to Ms. Ramirez 2 weeks before Williams attempted to sell it. The reporter continued. According to court documents, Williams's mother, Evelyn Williams, made the transfer voluntarily and with full legal capacity, contrary to claims made by her son that she suffers from dementia. They cut to a brief clip of Harold pushing past reporters, snarling, "No comment," before ducking into a black SUV. Even through the television screen, I could see the fury in his face, the disbelief that his carefully constructed plan had imploded so spectacularly. "They're saying he could face criminal charges," Maria said quietly, her eyes fixed on the screen. "Elder financial abuse is a felony in Connecticut." I should have felt vindicated, triumphant. Instead, a complex mixture of emotions washed over me. Relief that the truth was out, satisfaction that Harold would face consequences, but also a profound sadness. This was my son, my only child, the baby I had nursed through fevers, the boy whose skinned knees I had bandaged, the young man whose college tuition I had scraped together after Robert lost his job. Despite everything, a part of me still loved him, still mourned the relationship we might have had. The phone rang again. Dolores calling back. "Did you see?" she asked, her voice calmer now. "Yes," I managed. "I saw. Mr. Griffin says we should send the documents to the prosecutor. The recording too." She paused. "Are you okay with that, Evelyn? It will make things worse for Harold." I closed my eyes, feeling the warm Nevada sun on my face, hearing the distant call of desert birds. For a moment, I was transported back to another sunny day, nearly 60 years ago, when I'd held newborn Harold in my arms for the first time, marveling at his perfect fingers, his rosebud mouth, the wisp of dark hair so like his father's. "Evelyn?" Dolores's voice brought me back to the present. "Send them," I said quietly but firmly. "Send everything." What Harold had feared most had come to pass. He was on local television, being investigated for fraud and elder coercion. The carefully constructed image he'd spent decades building, respected businessman, community leader, philanthropist, was crumbling before his eyes. And I, the mother he'd dismissed as senile and burdensome, had orchestrated his downfall. It was what I dreaded and what he deserved. He could sell all the assets, but not peace. That was mine, and he had no idea how much it cost. As Maria helped me inside, my legs suddenly weak with the weight of what was happening, my phone buzzed with a text message. Harold finally breaking his silence. "What have you done, Mother?" 3 simple words, yet laden with accusation, disbelief, and the dawning realization that he had severely underestimated the woman who had given him life. I didn't respond. Some questions don't deserve answers. 3 months passed. Autumn descended on the Nevada desert, bringing cooler temperatures and skies of such perfect, uninterrupted blue that sometimes I would just sit on the porch and stare upward, marveling at the vastness. The scandal involving Harold had faded from the local news cycles, but its aftermath continued to ripple through our lives. I received occasional updates from Mr. Griffin. Harold's attempts to challenge the property transfer had been denied by the courts. The prosecutor was pursuing charges for attempted fraud. The real estate agent who had conspired with him was cooperating with authorities in exchange for leniency. Each piece of news should have brought me satisfaction, but instead left me feeling hollow. Victory, I was discovering, tasted different than I had imagined. On a Tuesday morning in late October, I was in the kitchen with Sophia, kneading bread dough for the communal dinner. My hands, gnarled with arthritis but still strong, Worked the dough with practiced movements. Push, fold, turn, repeat. The rhythm was meditative, connecting me to generations of women in my family who had performed this same task. "You have good hands for bread," Sophia observed, her Mexican accent more pronounced when she was relaxed. "My mother always said you could tell a person's character by how they handle dough." I smiled, dusting flour from my fingers. "And what does my dough handling say about me?" "Patient, thorough." She nodded approvingly, not afraid of a little pain to make something beautiful. The doorbell rang, interrupting our domestic tranquility. In the 3 months I'd been at the ranch house, we'd had few visitors, mostly delivery people, occasionally Mr. Griffin or other legal representatives, sometimes prospective new residents referred by social workers or elder advocacy groups. "I'll get it," offered Maria, who was sorting through mail at the dining table. "Keep your hands in the dough." I heard the front door open, followed by Maria's surprised exclamation. Then silence. When she returned to the kitchen doorway, her face was tight with concern. "Evelyn," she said carefully, "you have a visitor." Before she could say more, a figure appeared behind her in the doorway. Harold, but not the Harold I remembered. This man was aged, disheveled, with dark circles under bloodshot eyes, and clothes that hung loose on his frame, as if he'd lost significant weight. His silver hair, once meticulously styled, was unkempt, and several days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. "Mother," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. Sophia moved protectively closer to me, while Maria crossed her arms, blocking the doorway. "Should I ask him to leave?" Maria asked, her tone making it clear she was more than ready to do so. I wiped my flour-covered hands on a dish towel, taking a moment to steady myself before responding. "No," I said finally. "It's all right. We'll talk in the living room." Harold followed me like a chastened child, his usual confident stride replaced by an uncertain shuffle. As we sat across from each other, me in a worn but comfortable armchair, him perched awkwardly on the edge of the sofa, I was struck by how completely our positions had reversed. Now it was Harold who seemed small, vulnerable, lost. "How did you find me?" I asked, breaking the uncomfortable silence. "Your lawyer." He swallowed hard. "Mr. Griffin, he said you were doing well, that you were safe." "I am." Another silence stretched between us, filled with 3 months of unspoken accusations, questions, revelations. "Why?" he finally asked, the single word laden with everything he couldn't articulate. Why had I transferred the property? Why had I recorded him? Why had I left without confronting him? Why had I allowed his world to crumble? I studied my son's face, the face I had once known better than my own. The baby whose every expression I had memorized, the child whose tears I had wiped away, the teenager whose sullen moods I had weathered, the man who had grown increasingly distant as his success mounted. When had he become a stranger? "Because you left me no choice," I answered simply. Harold crumpled then, his carefully constructed facade disintegrating completely. Tears streamed down his face, his shoulders shaking with sobs that seemed torn from some deep, wounded place. "I've lost everything," he choked out between sobs. "The investors pulled out when the fraud investigation hit the news. The bank foreclosed on my house. Veronica left, took everything she could carry and filed for divorce the next day." I watched him, feeling a strange detachment, as if I were observing a scene in a play rather than my own son's breakdown. "I'm bankrupt," he continued, wiping his nose with the back of his hand, like he used to do as a little boy. "My reputation is ruined. The country club revoked my membership. My friends won't return my calls. I'm staying in a motel off the interstate." He looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed and desperate. "I need you, Mom. I need your help. I need forgiveness." In that moment I heard my mother's voice, clear as if she were sitting beside me. "Never return with the same coin. Return with the silence that hurts more." My mother, who had endured the Great Depression, who had worked as a seamstress with bleeding fingers to put food on our table, who had taught me that dignity was the one thing no one could take from you unless you surrendered it. I heard him, as I heard my mother when she said, "Never return with the same coin." return with the silence that hurts more. Harold, I said softly, the forgiveness was already given, but forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. He stared at me, confusion mixing with the desperation in his eyes. Now you know that an old woman sees more than she shows and acts when no one expects. He collapsed then, falling to his knees before me, burying his face in my lap, as he had done as a child, frightened by thunderstorms. His tears soaked through the fabric of my skirt, his body shuddering with the force of his grief. I sat motionless, my hands hovering above his head, torn between the maternal instinct to comfort and the hard-won wisdom that sometimes comfort is the least helpful thing you can offer. After a long moment, I gently placed my hands on his shoulders and guided him back to the sofa. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice small and uncertain. "Now you rebuild," I told him, "just as I had to do when your father died, just as I had to do when you betrayed me, just as all of us here have had to do when life took everything we thought was certain." I stood then, signaling that our conversation was over. "I need to finish the bread dough. It will rise too much if left unattended." Harold looked stricken, as if I had slapped him. "That's it? That's all you have to say to me?" "What more is there to say?" I asked. "You've lost everything. I found myself. Both of us have to live with the choices we've made." As I turned to leave, he called after me. Can I come back to visit?" I paused in the doorway, considering. "When you're ready to see me, really see me, as a person, not just as your mother or an obstacle or a resource to be managed, then yes, you can come back." I closed the door behind me, leaving him alone with my words and his thoughts. The mansion was officially donated to the project 1 year later. The legal process had been lengthy and complex. Countless hearings, depositions, paperwork that seemed to multiply overnight. Mr. Griffin handled most of it, shielding me from the bureaucratic labyrinth, updating me only when necessary. Harold fought it at first, hiring expensive lawyers who argued that I had been manipulated, that I lacked capacity, that the transfer was fraudulent. But the recording I had made of him planning to trick me into signing away my home proved to be his undoing. On a crisp spring morning, Dolores and I stood on the steps of the Connecticut courthouse, watching as the judge's final order was officially recorded. The property that had been my home for nearly 5 decades would now serve as the East Coast headquarters of the Invisible Grandmothers Project. "Are you sure about this?" Dolores asked, her hand warm on my arm. "It's still your home. You could move back." I shook my head, watching as a pair of cardinals darted between the maple trees lining the courthouse lawn. It stopped being my home the day Harold tried to sell it out from under me. This way, it becomes something better. A beginning instead of an ending. The renovation took 3 months. We converted the 5 bedrooms into comfortable shared spaces that could accommodate up to 11 women. The formal dining room became a communal gathering space. The conservatory a quiet reading room filled with books donated by local libraries. Robert's study, which I had preserved like a shrine after his death, was transformed into an office where women could receive legal advice, financial counseling, and emotional support. On the day we officially opened our doors, a small crowd gathered on the front lawn, mostly women from the Nevada house who had traveled east for the occasion. A few local reporters, some curious neighbors. Harold was not among them. I had sent him an invitation, more as a gesture of peace than with any expectation he would attend. He had not responded. The first residents arrived within the week. Catherine, whose children had convinced her to sign over her house by telling her it was a routine insurance document. Ruth, whose son-in-law had systematically emptied her bank accounts while acting as her caregiver. Gloria, whose family had simply abandoned her when her dementia diagnosis made her too difficult to deal with. Today, the house is filled with life in a way it never was during my years there alone after Robert died. Each bedroom has a plaque with the name of its donor. Eleanor's room, Teresa's room, Ava's room. In the garden, we've planted rose bushes with the ashes of letters that were never answered, burning the past to fertilize the future, as Sophia poetically put it. I walk among them like someone who has rediscovered what they never had, belonging. I didn't need revenge. I only needed courage and time, and to remember that sometimes justice doesn't come with sirens. It comes with silence, a signed paper, and a suitcase packed before the betrayal. This morning, as I was pruning the roses, my hands stiff with arthritis but still capable of delicate work, a car pulled into the driveway. Not the luxury sedan Harold used to drive, but a modest, compact car, practical and anonymous. He stepped out, looking older but healthier than when I'd last seen him. The desperate dishevelment was gone, replaced by a more authentic simplicity. "Hello, Mother," he said, standing awkwardly by his car. "I hope it's okay that I came." I set down my pruning shears and removed my gardening gloves. "It's been almost 2 years, Harold." "I know." He shifted his weight, eyes darting to the house with its new sign, the garden with its new arrangement. "I've been working on myself. Therapy, community service, a regular job for the first time in decades." I nodded, waiting. Time had taught me the power of silence, the value of not rushing to fill uncomfortable spaces. "I saw the article about this place in the Tribune," he continued, "about how you're helping women who are in situations like yours was." "Yes, it's good work," he said, and for the first time, there was no condescension in his tone, no false brightness masking impatience. "Important work." We stood in silence, the spring breeze carrying the scent of roses and new-mown grass. A lifetime of words unsaid hung between us. Accusations, apologies, explanations, regrets. "Would you like some tea?" I finally asked. Not forgiveness exactly, but an opening, a possibility. "I'd like that," he said, following me up the path to the house. In the kitchen, now industrial-sized to accommodate communal meals, we sat at the small table by the window, where I take my breakfast each morning. Gloria was there, arranging flowers in mismatched vases, her dementia sometimes making her forget what she's doing mid-task, but finding joy in the colors and textures of the blooms. "Who's this handsome fellow?" she asked, smiling vaguely at Harold. "This is my son," I said, the words feeling strange on my tongue after so long. "Oh, how lovely." "My son never visits," Gloria said matter-of-factly, without bitterness or sorrow, before wandering out with her flowers, humming softly. Harold watched her go, then turned to me with eyes that seemed to truly see me for the first time in years. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry for what I tried to do to you." I nodded, accepting his words without rushing to absolve him. "My son thought I was stupid," I said quietly. "I was just old, and old is different from weak." He flinched but held my gaze. "I know that now." Outside the window, Catherine and Ruth were teaching a Tai Chi class on the lawn, their movements slow and deliberate, finding strength in gentleness, power in patience. Just beyond them, Sophia and Maria were planting vegetable seedlings in the raised beds we'd installed, planning for a harvest months away, an act of faith in the future. "Your father would be proud of this," I told Harold, gesturing to the busy, purposeful scene outside. "He always said a house needs to be useful to be happy." "I remember," Harold said softly. "He used to say that about people too." I smiled, feeling the weight of the past lighten ever so slightly. Yes, he did. And as we sat drinking tea in companionable silence, I realized that the justice I had sought and found was never about punishment. It was about restoration, not just of what was rightfully mine, but of my sense of self, my place in the world, my voice. The house that was once a battleground had become a sanctuary. The betrayal that might have broken me had instead revealed my strength, and the son who had tried to discard me was now sitting across from me, humbled but present, learning, perhaps for the first time, to see his mother as a complete human being. My son thought I was helpless. I often tell the women who come to us, broken and doubting their own worth. But being old doesn't mean being weak. It means being a survivor, and survivors know how to fight back. As you've just witnessed, age doesn't diminish our capacity for justice. It enhances our patience to execute it perfectly. When someone underestimates you because of your age, your gender, or your perceived vulnerability, they hand you a powerful weapon, the element of surprise. What would you have done in my position? Would you have confronted Harold immediately, risking everything? Or would you have chosen the path of silent strength, allowing consequences to unfold naturally as I did? The greatest victory isn't in making others suffer for their betrayal. It's in refusing to let their betrayal define you. My son thought he was writing the final chapter of my story, but instead, he merely provided the catalyst for a new beginning. A beginning that helped not just me, but dozens of women like me find their voice and reclaim their dignity. Remember that justice doesn't always announce itself with sirens and spectacle. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in the form of a signed document, a recorded conversation, or a simple knowing laugh. If this story touched your heart, please follow our channel for more stories of resilience and redemption. Like and share if you believe that everyone deserves to be seen, truly seen, regardless of their age. And remember, being old is different from being weak. Being overlooked is different from being powerless. And being betrayed is different from being defeated.